The words hit me like a lightning bolt on that rainy Tuesday afternoon. My 7-year-old granddaughter Lily looked up from her coloring book, her voice barely above a whisper as she said, "Grandma Rose, I heard Mommy and Daddy talking last night. They said they're going to take all your money and put you in one of those old people places." I felt my coffee mug tremble in my hands as the innocent truth spilled from her lips. For months, I'd sensed something was wrong with my daughter Charlotte and her husband Mike's sudden interest in my well-being. Now, thanks to a child's honest heart, I finally understood their true intentions. If this story resonates with you, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Your support means the world to me, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to share this with anyone who might need to hear it. Sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected places. Let me take you back to where this all began. 8 months ago, my beloved husband Richard passed away from complications following a stroke. We'd been married for 42 years, and his death left me feeling lost and vulnerable. Charlotte and Mike, who had barely visited us twice a year before Richard's passing, suddenly became the most attentive children imaginable. "Mom, you shouldn't be living alone in that big house," Charlotte had insisted just weeks after the funeral. "Come stay with us. We have that guest room, and Lily would love having her grandma around all the time." Mike nodded enthusiastically, adding, "It would really help us out too, Mom Rose. Charlotte's been so stressed with work, and having you there to help with Lily would be a blessing." At the time, their concern felt genuine. I was drowning in grief, struggling to manage the household finances Richard had always handled, and the loneliness in our 3-bedroom home was suffocating. When they offered me a place in their family, it seemed like a lifeline. I should have recognized it for what it really was: a carefully laid trap. Within 2 weeks of Richard's funeral, I'd signed over my house to a real estate agent. The market was hot, and the house sold quickly for $485,000. Charlotte had suggested I put the money in their joint account temporarily while I figured out my long-term plans. "It'll be safer there, Mom," she'd explained. "You're dealing with so much right now. Let us handle the financial stuff." I trusted her. She was my daughter, my only child. The money went into their account, and I moved into their converted garage space. Not the guest room they'd promised, which mysteriously became Mike's home office right before my arrival. Living with them quickly revealed the true nature of their generosity. I wasn't a beloved family member. I was unpaid domestic help. Every morning, I was expected to get Lily ready for school while Charlotte slept in. I cooked dinner every night, did the laundry, cleaned the house, and provided free babysitting whenever they wanted to go out, which was increasingly often. "Mom, you're so much better at this stuff than we are," Charlotte would say whenever I questioned the arrangement. "Lily adores you, and honestly, you seem happier when you're busy." Mike would chime in with, "We're saving so much money on childcare and housekeeping. It's really a win-win situation for everyone." But I wasn't winning anything. I was losing myself, piece by piece. My Social Security check went directly into their account to help with household expenses. My friends rarely called anymore because Charlotte had told them I wasn't feeling up to visitors. My independence had evaporated, replaced by a carefully constructed prison of guilt and manipulation. The warning signs had been there all along. The hushed phone conversations that stopped when I entered the room. The way Mike's eyes lit up when discussing my future care needs. The brochures for assisted living facilities that Charlotte claimed were just for research, but grief and loneliness had made me blind to their true intentions. Now, sitting at their kitchen table with Lily's innocent words echoing in my mind, everything crystallized. They weren't planning to care for me. They were planning to dispose of me. And they intended to keep every penny of the money I'd earned through 42 years of marriage and careful saving. I looked down at Lily, still focused on coloring a picture of a rainbow, completely unaware that she'd just given me the ammunition I needed to fight back. "What else did you hear, sweetheart?" I asked gently. She shrugged, not looking up from her crayons. "Daddy said something about papers you need to sign. And Mommy said they found a place called Sunset Manor that costs $3,000 every month. She said once you sign the papers, they can use your money to pay for it." $3,000 a month. I did the quick math in my head. With my Social Security and the interest from my house money, They could keep me warehoused in Sunset Manor for years, while living comfortable lives funded by my life savings. But they'd made one critical error in their scheming. They'd underestimated me. At 71 years old, I might have been grieving and temporarily lost, but I wasn't helpless. And I certainly wasn't going to go quietly into whatever nightmare they'd planned for me. That afternoon, while Charlotte was at work and Mike was at his construction job, I made 3 phone calls that would change everything. The first was to my old friend Dorothy, a retired legal secretary who'd always been sharper than a tack. The second was to Jonathan Wells, the lawyer who'd handled Richard's estate. The third was to First National Bank, where I'd been a customer for over 30 years. By the time Charlotte and Mike returned home that evening, I had a plan. And unlike their scheme, mine was going to be completely legal, utterly devastating, and absolutely foolproof. As I served them dinner that night, pot roast with mashed potatoes, their favorite meal, I smiled and chatted about Lily's day at school. Inside, however, I was counting down the hours until I could execute the most satisfying revenge of my life. They thought they were dealing with a helpless old woman. Tomorrow, they'd discover they'd awakened a force they were completely unprepared to handle. The next morning, I woke up before dawn with a clarity I hadn't felt since Richard's death. While Charlotte and Mike slept soundly in their king-sized bed, the one partially paid for with my house money, I sat in the cramped garage space they'd converted into my room and made my first move. Dorothy arrived at 7 a.m. sharp, just as I'd requested. She came through the back gate to avoid being seen by the neighbors, carrying a large handbag and wearing the same determined expression she'd worn 30 years ago, when she'd helped me navigate my mother's estate issues. "Rose, honey, you look terrible," she said, embracing me tightly. "But your voice on the phone yesterday told me everything I needed to know. You're ready to fight back." Dorothy had always been direct, one of the many reasons our friendship had lasted through decades of life's ups and downs. I poured her coffee in my makeshift kitchenette, a hot plate and mini fridge Charlotte had grudgingly installed after I'd mentioned needing to eat regularly for my diabetes medication. "Dorothy, I need you to be completely honest with me. Do I have legal grounds to get my money back?" She opened her handbag and pulled out a yellow legal pad covered in her neat handwriting. "I spent half the night researching this. The short answer is yes, but it's going to require some strategic thinking." Her eyes sparkled with the same mischief I remembered from our younger days. "Tell me exactly what paperwork you signed when you gave them that money." I retrieved the small fireproof box I kept hidden under my narrow bed, the only valuable thing they hadn't asked me to let them handle for me. Inside were copies of every document, every bank statement, every receipt from the past 8 months. Richard had trained me well about keeping records, though I'd never imagined I'd need them as evidence against my own daughter. Dorothy spread the papers across my tiny fold-out table, her trained eye scanning each document with professional precision. After 20 minutes, she looked up with a grim smile. "Rose, they've been sloppy, very sloppy." "What do you mean?" "Look here." She pointed to the deposit slip from when my house money went into their account. "This is marked as a temporary deposit for estate planning purposes. And here," she shuffled to another paper, "your Social Security is being deposited as contribution to household expenses, but there's no rental agreement, no documentation of what those expenses actually are." My heart began to race. "So they can't just keep it?" "Not legally, no. But Rose, there's something else you need to know." Dorothy's expression grew serious. "I did some digging into Sunset Manor yesterday. It's not just expensive. It's been cited 3 times in the past 2 years for neglect and inadequate care. They're not planning to put you somewhere nice. They're planning to warehouse you in the cheapest place that sounds fancy." The full magnitude of their betrayal hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just about the money. They were willing to condemn me to a substandard facility where I might suffer or even die, as long as it freed up their finances and their lives. At 9 a.m., Dorothy drove me to Jonathan Wells' law office. Jonathan had been Richard's friend since college, and seeing him again brought a fresh wave of grief. But when I explained what Charlotte and Mike were planning, his sympathetic expression transformed into something much harder. "Rose, what you're describing could constitute financial elder abuse," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. "In this state, that's not just a civil matter. It can be criminal." He pulled out a thick folder. I've been handling cases like this more and more often. Adult children who see their aging parents as ATMs rather than family members. What can we do? I asked. Jonathan smiled, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. We're going to give them exactly what they're asking for, just not in the way they expect. He began pulling documents from his filing cabinet. We'll start with a new will, updated power of attorney designations, and a formal demand for return of your assets. Then we'll see how cooperative they want to be. As we worked through the paperwork, Jonathan explained the strategy. The key is documentation and timing. We need to create an official record of your mental competency, your understanding of your financial situation, and your explicit wishes regarding your care and your money. Then we present them with a choice: return what's yours voluntarily, or face legal consequences that could include criminal charges. By noon, I had signed documents that revoked any informal arrangements with Charlotte and Mike, appointed Jonathan as my attorney, and established my clear mental capacity through witness statements. We'd also drafted a formal letter demanding the return of my house proceeds and outlining the terms under which I would continue to live with them or not. There's one more thing, Jonathan said as we finished. I want you to start documenting everything. Every conversation, every demand they make for unpaid labor, every time they isolate you from friends or make decisions about your money without consulting you. We need to establish a pattern of manipulation and control. Dorothy drove me to lunch at Morrison's cafeteria, where we used to meet monthly before I moved in with Charlotte and Mike. It felt strange to be out in the world again, making my own choices about where to go and what to eat. You know what's really bothering me? I said as we settled into our booth with trays of comfort food. It's not just the money, it's that they looked at me and saw someone disposable. Someone whose wishes and dignity didn't matter as long as they got what they wanted. Dorothy reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Honey, that says everything about who they are and nothing about who you are. You're not disposable, and you're certainly not helpless. What you're doing today proves that. As we ate, Dorothy filled me in on what I'd missed during my isolation. Our friend Grace had been asking about me for months. The book club had held a spot open for me, assuming I'd return when I felt ready. The church ladies had been leaving messages that Charlotte had apparently intercepted. They've been systematically cutting you off from anyone who might notice what they're doing to you, Dorothy observed. Classic manipulation tactic. Make the victim dependent on the abuser for all social contact and information. After lunch, we made one more stop that Dorothy insisted was crucial: the bank. I marched into First National with my legal documents and asked to speak with the manager about my accounts and the unauthorized access others had been given to my funds. Mrs. Patterson, the branch manager, reviewed my situation with growing concern. Mrs. Williams, I have to tell you, we've been uncomfortable with some of the transaction patterns on accounts linked to your information. Your daughter has been making withdrawals and transfers that seemed unusual for normal household expenses. She showed me printouts that made my blood boil. In 8 months, they'd spent over $60,000 of my money on things that had nothing to do with my care or household expenses. A new truck for Mike. A family vacation to Disney World that I hadn't been invited on. Charlotte's shopping sprees that were categorized as Rose's personal expenses. Can you freeze their access to my funds? I asked. With these legal documents, absolutely. As of right now, they can't touch another penny without your written authorization. Driving home with Dorothy, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. But I also felt the weight of what was coming. Charlotte and Mike would arrive home, expecting their compliant, grateful mother figure. Instead, they'd find a woman who'd spent the day reclaiming her power and preparing for war. Are you ready for this, Rose? Dorothy asked as we pulled into the driveway. Because once you confront them, there's no going back. This is going to get ugly before it gets better. I looked at the house that had become my prison, then at the garage where I'd been sleeping on a narrow cot while they enjoyed the master suite my money had helped furnish. Dorothy, I've been ready for this my whole life. I just didn't know it until yesterday. As Dorothy drove away, I stood in the driveway and felt the afternoon sun on my face. For the first time in 8 months, I wasn't rushing to start dinner preparations or fold laundry, or clean up after people who saw me as a convenience rather than a person. Tonight, when Charlotte and Mike came home expecting their usual routine, they were going to discover that their carefully constructed plan had a fatal flaw. They'd underestimated the woman they were trying to destroy. I walked into their house. Not my home, I now understood, but their house where I'd been an unwelcome guest, and began preparing for the conversation that would change everything. At exactly 6:15 p.m., I heard Charlotte's Honda pull into the driveway, followed by the rumble of Mike's new truck, the one purchased with my money. I was sitting at their kitchen table with my legal documents spread out in neat piles, having spent the afternoon practicing what I would say. Lily was at her friend Madison's house for a sleepover, which meant we could have this conversation without an innocent child witnessing the explosion that was about to occur. Charlotte walked in first, her face already showing irritation. "Mom, why isn't dinner ready? It's past 6, and I told you this morning I had a long day at the office." She stopped abruptly when she saw me sitting calmly at the table instead of rushing around the kitchen as usual. Mike followed behind her, loosening his tie and barely glancing in my direction. "Something smells different in here. What are we having tonight?" Then he too noticed my unusual position and the papers covering their dining table. "Sit down, both of you," I said quietly, my voice carrying an authority I hadn't used in months. "We need to talk." Charlotte's eyes narrowed as she took in the legal documents. "Mom, what's all this? And why do you look—" She paused, searching for words. "Different?" "I look different because I spent today remembering who I am," I replied. "I'm not your live-in maid, your unpaid babysitter, or your personal ATM. I'm a 71-year-old woman who's been grieving her husband while being systematically robbed by her own daughter." The color drained from Mike's face. He sank into a chair without being asked, his eyes fixed on the bank statements I'd strategically placed on top of the document pile. "Mom, I don't know what you think you've discovered, but—" Charlotte began, but I cut her off. "I know about Sunset Manor," I said calmly. $3,000 a month for substandard care in a facility that's been cited for neglect. I know about the $60,000 you've spent from my accounts in 8 months. And I know that you were planning to have me declared incompetent so you could access the rest of my money legally." Charlotte's mouth opened and closed several times before any sound came out. "Who told you that? You're confused, Mom. You're not thinking clearly since Dad died." I pulled out the first document from Jonathan's office. "This is a competency evaluation completed this morning by Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a licensed psychiatrist. She found me to be of completely sound mind and fully capable of managing my own affairs." I slid it across the table. "Would you like to read her assessment?" Mike finally found his voice. "Rose, we never meant for you to feel— Look, we were trying to protect you. The world is complicated for someone your age, and we thought— You thought you could steal from me while convincing me it was for my own good." I interrupted. "Let me show you exactly what you thought." I spread out the bank statements Mrs. Patterson had printed for me. "This $1,700 charge to Premier Auto? That's not a household expense. That's the down payment on Mike's truck. This $3,000 charge to Tropical Getaways? That's your family vacation to Disney World. The one I wasn't invited on despite it being paid for with my money." Charlotte leaned forward, her voice taking on the wheedling tone she'd perfected over the past months. "Mom, we used that money to create stability for our family. You benefited too. You had a place to live, food to eat, family around you. I had a garage to sleep in, household chores to do without pay, and increasing isolation from anyone who might notice what you were doing to me." I pulled out another document. "This is a detailed accounting of the work I've performed for your household over the past 8 months. Childcare, housekeeping, cooking, laundry. It totals approximately 32 hours per week of unpaid labor." Mike's face had gone from pale to green. "Rose, we appreciate everything you've done, but we never asked you to keep track of. At minimum wage, you owe me over $6,000 in back pay," I continued as if he hadn't spoken. "But that's not why I'm showing you this. I'm showing you this because I want you to understand that I see exactly what you've been doing, and it ends today." Charlotte tried a different approach, her eyes filling with crocodile tears. "Mom, we're family. We love you. Yes, maybe we made some mistakes with the financial arrangements. But we can work this out. We don't need lawyers and documents. We can just talk through this like adults. The time for talking was 8 months ago, before you started spending my money without permission. I replied. The time for talking was when you decided to isolate me from my friends and treat me like hired help. The time for talking was before you started researching nursing homes without consulting me about my own future. I picked up the most important document from the pile. This is a formal demand for the immediate return of all funds taken from my accounts without written authorization. You have 72 hours to transfer $485,000, the proceeds from my house sale, back to an account in my name only. Mike shot to his feet. That's impossible. We use that money to pay off our mortgage and credit cards. We don't have it sitting in a checking account somewhere. Then you'll need to get creative, I said calmly. Refinance your mortgage, liquidate your retirement accounts, sell some possessions. I don't particularly care how you do it, but you're going to do it. Charlotte's tears dried up instantly, replaced by a look of pure fury. You can't do this to us. We're your family. That money was supposed to help secure our future, Emma's education fund. Emma's education fund? I laughed, and it wasn't a pleasant sound. You've spent her inheritance on truck payments and vacations. Don't pretend this was ever about Emma's future. I pulled out the final document, the one that I knew would hurt them most. This is my new will, executed this morning. The previous version left my estate to Charlotte with provisions for Emma's care and education. This version leaves everything to Emma directly, held in trust until she turns 25. Charlotte and Mike are specifically excluded from receiving any inheritance. The silence that followed was deafening. Charlotte stared at the will as if it were a venomous snake, while Mike began pacing behind his chair like a caged animal. You're being vindictive, Charlotte said finally, her voice cold. This isn't about justice or protecting Emma. This is about punishing us for trying to help you. Help me? I stood up, and both of them instinctively stepped back. You want to know what would have helped me? Honesty about your financial struggles. A genuine invitation to be part of your family instead of your domestic staff. Respect for my autonomy and intelligence instead of manipulation and lies. I began gathering my documents. But most of all, you could have helped me by seeing me as a person worthy of love and consideration instead of a problem to be managed and an asset to be liquidated. Mike tried one last desperate appeal. Rose, please be reasonable. If we have to pay back all that money, we'll lose the house. Emma will have to change schools. We'll be financially ruined. You should have considered those consequences before you decided to steal from me, I replied. But I'm not unreasonable. I'm giving you a choice. I pulled out one more paper I'd been saving for this moment. This is a rental agreement. If you want me to continue living here, you'll pay me fair market rent for my room and services. $700 per month for the space, plus $20 per hour for any childcare or household work I choose to perform. And you'll return my house money within 6 months instead of 72 hours. Charlotte looked at the rental agreement as if I'd just handed her a death warrant. $700 plus hourly wages? We can't afford that. Then I suggest you start looking for alternative arrangements, I said pleasantly. For both of us, because I'm not going to continue subsidizing your lifestyle while being treated like an unwanted burden. I headed toward the door, then turned back one final time. Oh, and one more thing. All access to my bank accounts and financial information has been revoked as of this afternoon. You can't touch another penny of my money without my explicit written consent. As I walked toward my converted garage room, I heard Charlotte burst into tears and Mike start cursing. Their perfect plan had just crumbled, and they were finally facing the consequences of their greed and manipulation. For the first time in 8 months, I felt like myself again. Strong, decisive, and utterly unwilling to be anyone's victim. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as they tried to negotiate or manipulate their way out of the corner they'd painted themselves into. But tonight, I was going to sleep peacefully in my narrow cot, knowing that I'd finally fought back against the people who'd mistaken my grief for weakness and my love for stupidity. The war wasn't over, but I'd just won the most important battle, the one for my own self-respect. 3 days later, I woke up in my own apartment for the first time in 8 months. The one-bedroom unit in Riverside Gardens wasn't fancy, but it was mine. The morning sun streamed through windows I could open whenever I wanted, and the coffee I was brewing was exactly the strength I preferred, not watered down to accommodate Mike's sensitive stomach. Charlotte and Mike had lasted exactly 36 hours after our confrontation before capitulating. The phone calls had started at 6 a.m. the morning after I'd presented them with my demands, first pleading, then angry, then desperate. But I'd held firm, and Jonathan had fielded most of their attempts to negotiate. The turning point came when Jonathan informed them that failure to return my money would result in criminal charges for elder financial abuse, which carried potential prison sentences. Suddenly, they discovered they could indeed access the funds I'd demanded. They refinanced their house, borrowed against Mike's retirement account, and sold Charlotte's jewelry collection and Mike's prized motorcycle. It wasn't easy for them, but it was necessary. The $485,000 was transferred back to my personal account on Thursday morning, and I'd signed the lease on my apartment that same afternoon. The moving process had been surprisingly therapeutic. Dorothy and 3 other friends from my old book club had volunteered to help me pack and relocate the belongings that had been scattered around Charlotte and Mike's house. It felt like reclaiming pieces of myself that I'd forgotten existed. "Rose, you look 10 years younger," observed Grace Matthews as we arranged my favorite armchair by the apartment's large window. "There's life in your eyes again." She was right. For months, I'd felt like I was slowly disappearing, becoming smaller and more invisible with each passing day. Now, surrounded by my own possessions in my own space, I felt substantial again. Real. The apartment came furnished, but I'd brought Richard's photographs, my grandmother's china, and the books I'd collected over decades of marriage. Simple things that made the space feel like home, rather than just another place to exist. My first visitor in the new apartment was Lily. Charlotte had called on Saturday morning, her voice carefully controlled but obviously strained. "Mom, Lily's been asking about you constantly. Would it be okay if she visited this afternoon?" I'd agreed, curious to see how my granddaughter would react to the dramatic changes in our family dynamic. When she arrived, escorted by a subdued Charlotte, her eyes went wide as she took in my apartment. "Grandma Rose, this is so pretty!" she exclaimed, running to the window that overlooked the community garden. "And look, there are flowers everywhere." Charlotte lingered in the doorway, uncomfortable and uncertain. This was probably the first time she'd been in a position of asking for my approval, rather than assuming my compliance. "Would you like some lemonade, Lily?" I asked. "I made it fresh this morning." As Lily explored my new home with the enthusiasm of a 7-year-old, Charlotte finally spoke. "Mom, I want you to know that Mike and we've been talking a lot since Thursday about everything that happened and how we handled things." I poured lemonade for Lily and coffee for myself, deliberately not offering anything to Charlotte. "And what conclusions have you reached?" "We were wrong," she said quietly. "Not just about the money, but about how we treated you. We told ourselves we were helping, but really we were just using you." I studied my daughter's face, looking for signs of genuine remorse versus strategic manipulation. The lines around her eyes suggested she'd been crying, and her usual perfect appearance was slightly disheveled. This might actually be real regret. "Charlotte, I appreciate you saying that, but words are easy. What matters now is how you choose to behave going forward." She nodded, then hesitated before continuing. "The house payment is going to be really tight now with the refinancing. We might have to downsize, find something smaller." I sipped my coffee, waiting to see if this was leading somewhere meaningful, or if it was another attempt to manipulate me into solving their problems. I was wondering if maybe you'd be willing to babysit Lily occasionally. For pay, of course. $15 an hour, like you mentioned in that rental agreement. We can't afford full-time daycare, and honestly, Lily misses you terribly. This was interesting. Charlotte was actually asking for help instead of demanding it, and offering fair compensation instead of assuming I'd work for free. It was a small step, but it was movement in the right direction. "I'd be happy to spend time with Lily," I replied, "but let's be clear about the boundaries. I'm her grandmother, not her daycare provider. If you need childcare, you ask politely, and respect my answer if I'm not available. And Lily comes here to my apartment. I'm not coming back to your house to work. Of course. Charlotte agreed quickly. Whatever you're comfortable with. Lily bounded back into the kitchen area, her face glowing with excitement. Grandma, there's a playground right outside. And the lady next door said, there are movie nights in the community room. That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. Would you like to go explore the playground? As we walked through the gardens to the playground, I felt Charlotte watching us with something that might have been envy. For 8 months, she'd taken for granted that I would always be available, always compliant, always grateful for whatever scraps of attention or respect she chose to offer. Now she was seeing what she'd lost through her greed and manipulation. After Charlotte left with Lily that evening, I called Dorothy to update her on the day's events. So she's trying to rebuild bridges, Dorothy observed. Do you think it's genuine? I think losing access to my money and free labor has been a wake-up call, I replied. Whether she's actually sorry or just scared of the consequences remains to be seen, but I'm willing to give her the chance to prove she can treat me with basic human decency. Over the following weeks, I settled into my new routine. Monday mornings were for grocery shopping and errands. Tuesday afternoons were book club meetings that I'd missed terribly. Wednesdays, I volunteered at the local animal shelter, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for when I was managing Charlotte's household. I also started taking evening walks through the neighborhood, rediscovering the simple pleasure of moving through the world at my own pace, on my own schedule. The weight I'd gained during my months of stress and depression began to disappear, and I found myself sleeping deeply for the first time since Richard's death. Lily visited twice a week, and those afternoons became highlights I looked forward to eagerly. We baked cookies, worked on craft projects, and I helped her with homework. But more importantly, we talked. Really talked, in ways we'd never been able to when I was just the unpaid babysitter living in her parents' garage. Grandma, why did you move away from us? She asked one afternoon as we planted herbs in small pots on my balcony. I considered how to answer honestly without burdening a child with adult complexities. Sometimes grown-ups need their own space to be happy and healthy, I said. And sometimes people in the same family need to learn better ways to treat each other. She nodded solemnly, patting soil around a basil seedling. Mommy cries sometimes now. She says she misses having you help with everything. Your mommy is learning some important lessons about how to ask for help instead of just expecting it, I replied. That's hard sometimes, but it's good for her to learn. 3 months after moving to Riverside Gardens, I received an unexpected phone call. It was Linda Morrison, or rather, Linda Morrison Hayes now, calling from Atlanta. Mrs. Williams, this is Linda Hayes. I used to work with your husband Richard at Morrison Engineering. I hope you don't mind me calling, but I heard about your situation through mutual friends, and I wanted to reach out. My blood pressure spiked. Richard's former coworker, the one he'd mentioned frequently in his last years. Always, Linda says this, or Linda thinks that. I'd suspected there might have been more to their relationship than professional collaboration, but I'd never confronted Richard about it. What can I do for you, Linda? I wanted to apologize, she said, her voice shaking slightly. Richard told me about your family situation in his final months, how worried he was about leaving you alone with Charlotte and Mike. He asked me to check on you after he was gone, but I was dealing with my own family crisis and I let it slip. If I'd reached out sooner, maybe I could have helped prevent what happened to you. This wasn't what I'd expected. Linda, you didn't owe me anything. Richard's concerns about my family weren't your responsibility. But he cared about you so much, she continued. He talked about you constantly, your strength, your intelligence, how much he admired your independence. He was terrified that Charlotte would try to take advantage of your grief, and he was right. We talked for another 20 minutes, and I found myself liking this woman who'd been part of Richard's world. She wasn't a threat or a secret, just a colleague who genuinely cared about my husband and, by extension, about me. As summer turned to fall, my new life had found its rhythm. Charlotte had proven herself capable of asking politely for help instead of demanding it, and she was consistently paying me for my time with Lily. We weren't close the way we'd been when she was young, but we'd found a functional relationship based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. Mike had been more resistant to change, occasionally slipping back into his old assumption that I should be grateful for any attention from Charlotte's family. But I'd learned to shut down those behaviors quickly and firmly, and he was slowly adapting to the new reality. The most surprising development came in October, when Dorothy suggested I consider dating again. "Rose, you're 71, not 91, she said as we walked through the farmer's market. "There are plenty of interesting men your age who'd love to spend time with someone as sharp and independent as you." I laughed at the suggestion, but privately I had to admit the idea wasn't completely unappealing. I'd spent 42 years as half of a couple, then 8 months as a victim, and now 4 months rediscovering who I was as an individual. Maybe it was time to explore what I might be as a partner to someone who saw me as an equal. On a crisp November morning, exactly 1 year after Richard's death, I sat in my apartment with my morning coffee and reflected on the journey that had brought me here. A year ago, I'd been a grieving widow, lost and vulnerable. 8 months ago, I'd been a victim of financial abuse, isolated and diminished. Today, I was a 71-year-old woman with her own apartment, her own money, her own social life, and her own choices about how to spend her time. I had a relationship with my granddaughter based on love rather than obligation, and a daughter who was slowly learning to treat me with respect. Most importantly, I'd learned that being kind doesn't require being weak, and being family doesn't excuse treating people badly. I'd discovered strength I didn't know I possessed, and reclaimed a sense of self-worth that had been slowly eroded by months of manipulation. My phone rang, interrupting my morning meditation. It was Lily, calling to tell me about a school project she needed help with. As I listened to her excited chatter about volcanoes and science fair presentations, I smiled at how different this conversation was from the desperate whispers that had started this whole journey. "Can you come over this afternoon, Grandma? I really need your help." "Of course, sweetheart," I replied. "But this time, I'm coming because I want to, not because anyone expects me to." That, I realized, made all the difference in the world.